What's up, everybody? So, if you follow me, as you know, I've said it before, drive a truck. Preparing myself to transition from driving a truck because it's been long enough. I'm ready to get out, but in my my plan is to just be a full-time author and work with art and do my apparel business. I actually have everything all set up. I just can't put it in motion right now, on a level where it's actually going to generate any income for me at this point, because I'm still driving a truck. I've thought about getting my brokerage license. I've actually looked into schools. There's a couple schools that I want nothing to do with. They're really cheap. They're easy to get your license through, but what they teach you is just garbage. And unfortunately, in the trucking industry, we appear to be working with a lot of people that are using those crappy schools. And the thing is, it's not expensive to take a decent course to get your brokerage license. You can do it for about $1,000. Maybe with inflation, it might be $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 now. But those are good schools. I mean, I've looked at them, and those are the ones I've been thinking about getting my license through. And you can do it online, and they tell you the things you need to learn. And one of the key things they tell you need to learn to be a broker in the trucking industry is you need to know our hours of service. You need to memorize, I don't have it at hand right now, but we got a book. It's about this thick. As a truck driver, you pretty much got to memorize this book. You don't have to memorize everything in it, but you have to memorize over half of it. I think it's something like 60 or 70% of that book we actually memorize. It's like memorizing 60 or 70% of the Bible. I mean, it's a big book. And that's that's the King James Version Bible. Forget about it if you've studied the Ethiopian Bible, the old Christian Bible like I've done. I mean, that's got, 20 more books in it than the New King James Version Bible. It's actually the old Christian Bible. It's the Bible that was written during the time of Christ. So it's got a lot more books in it. I imagine memorizing 70% of that. But one of the biggest problems in our industry is the brokers, they don't know the hours of service. You're supposed to know the hours of service to do this. And I don't understand how these people are getting brokerage licenses if they don't know the hours of service. And then you have other ones where they have a small grasp of the hours of service, but they still can't do the math properly because there's things that they don't understand because they're not truck drivers. I mean, that's another problem in this industry. People who are getting into the logistical side of this when it comes to the office, they should be experienced truck drivers. Every single one of them. When it comes to anything with planning and booking and, outside of the secretary, everybody should be an experienced truck driver. And even the secretary, I mean, if you have a secretary where, he or she went and got their CDL and did it for 6 months, I mean, it's only a plus. But the more people you have that are experienced truck drivers moving up through the ranks out of driving a truck, the better off you are. Because the problem is, we have people that, like I said, they don't understand the hours of service. A lot of them don't even know the hours of service. And they can't do the math because they don't understand the real world. For example, there's this old formula. It used to work. It really doesn't work anymore. But pretty much, you averaged out the truck at doing 50 miles an hour. But there's been changes to the rules of hours of service, which throws that out of whack now because they're not adding the 30-minute forced break on us that we have to do. they the increase in traffic. So, they're not adding 30 minutes for every major city that you go through. They're not adding 45 minutes for a city like Atlanta. They're not adding an hour for going through Baltimore or Washington, D.C. They're not adding an hour for going through New York City. They're not adding 45 minutes for going through Chicago. They don't know how to add these different numbers to it, because you're going through these different places like an experienced truck driver knows. We can plan. That's our job. That's actually our job, is to plan. And then some of them, they just can't add it all. I'm on a load right now where I had a broker arguing with me, not understanding why I can't do a trip that, because of the 10-hour break, it's the way that this is all set up. This has got multiple stops on it. And the only way to have made it to the second stop, you have to do a 10-hour break in the middle. So there's no way to do the load without having the 10-hour break calculated into this. And the broker didn't understand that. And the broker doesn't understand why, because of that 10-hour break, you need 16 hours, 16 and a half hours if you're planning properly, because you're adding 30 minutes because you're going halfway through Dallas and you're going halfway through Little Rock, so you add 15 minutes for each of them and you're in the clear. So you need 16 and a half hours because it's a 6.5 hour trip, but you need to do a 10-hour break in there, so you need 16 and a half hours. He doesn't understand why you can't do a 16 and a half hour trip in 13 hours. Now, I understand I can explain this to a second grader, which is a larger number, 16 or 13, and they get it. But people with college educations don't understand this. And I don't understand how. It says a lot about what a college education is worth anymore. If someone with a college education cannot understand this, but I can explain it to a second grader and they can understand this, how much is college dumbing down people? I'm sorry, but it's the plain and simple fact. How much is college dumbing down people? The second grader could understand it. Hell, I could probably explain it to my grandson. Come on. It's simple math. And then you have some of them where we have a couple rules in our hours of service that it's for the truck driver. It's for us to use. For example, we have a split sleeper berth rule. It's a really complicated rule. Once you understand it, it's actually really easy, but the way that they've created it, it makes it really complicated. It's really difficult to understand until you understand it. Once you understand it, it's really easy. But until you understand it, it's an extremely complicated rule. And this is only for the truck driver. Nobody planning outside of the truck driver, nobody planning should be using that rule, because that rule is not meant for the brokers to say, oh, well, we can manipulate this and because then they screw everything up. Because that is not a rule for them to use. That is not even a rule for the planners to use, the route planners. When you work with these big companies, they have route planners. It's not even a rule for them to use. Because the reason you have this split sleeper berth rule is it's designed to get us out of a situation so that we can still make our delivery on time. If we get stuck in a situation where there's an accident, we get stuck in a situation where there's extreme construction, we get stuck in a situation where we get held up longer than we should have been at a shipper. It gives us a tool that gives us an option to try to fix the situation without having to reschedule. So it's only our tool. This is not for anybody else in the industry to use but us, the driver. And these people think that it's their tool. They think that they're allowed to use this. They are not allowed to use it. It's not meant for them. It is not designed for them, because when they put it in and then you get screwed up, it makes a really big mess, like the one we're in right now. It's just chaos that I've got stuck in. And the problem was, this whole thing started, if I could have caught it earlier, I would have brought it up earlier even. But the problem was, we were supposed to go pick up a different load. And because we were supposed to go pick up a different load, I had actually started my clock already, and I was driving up to Fort Worth. And then that load canceled. So instead of going to Fort Worth, we got this load where I was picking up and going to pick it up in Dallas. So I stopped. I glanced at it real quick. All I did was glance at it to see where I was picking up. That was my main concern, where I was picking up and what time I had to get there. And I saw that, I had about 2 hours to spare. So I was able to go in, use a bathroom, get some coffee, put some fuel in the truck, do things that I needed to do. And then I got up to the shipper because I knew I had a 5 a.m. appointment. And with the 5 a.m. appointment, I still hadn't had time to really start figuring out all the math and seeing what the mileage was or anything. But I knew with a 5 a.m. appointment, if I could get loaded early, it would only work to my benefit. So I got there at 2:30 for a 4:30 appointment. They didn't start loading me till 4:30. There's nothing I can do about it. Then it took 3 hours to get out of there. It actually only took them 2 hours to load the truck, but it took them an hour to do the paperwork. I don't know why. It should have been as simple as print, but it's not that simple. Everything was already there. They already have the invoices. Everything is already known, all the numbers, all the weights, all this, all that. Just throw it. The only thing they had to do was add in seal numbers, but everything was already... I don't understand how it could take an hour to just put in a couple seal numbers. But it took an hour to put in a couple seal numbers. It is what it is. So I didn't get out of there till 7:35. So anybody who's a truck driver, they're already doing this math in their head, and they're already seeing the problem with this. It was about 5:30, 6 o'clock that I think her name was Jasmine, the first one from TQL, called me. And she sounds like she literally just started on the job. She sounds really young on the phone. Sounds like, it's probably her first week on the job even. But she understood the math. That's what makes this really crazy, because someone who you can tell is either really young or probably really new at the job, when you explain the math is really simple. It's only arithmetic. It's not even complex math that we're talking about here. It's very simple math. She understood it. And so it all made sense to her. So she's like, okay, we're putting this down in the notations. So I get it. It all makes sense. Okay. Yeah. So she's putting everything into the notations. Then some guy called, I forget his name, but this guy calls me and he says he's the one that planned it out. That's what he does. He plans these out and books them. And he says, I planned this all out and I booked it and I fine-tuned it. What'd you fine-tune it with? A buzzsaw? And he doesn't understand the math. How can you be the guy that plans everything and schedules everything and you don't understand the math? That's the craziest part. The one who should have the most understanding of the math doesn't understand the math. I could not explain to him, with him understanding, why you cannot do a 16-hour run in 13 hours. Think about it. You have a box of donuts. You can fit 12 donuts in your box. How many donuts can you fit in the box? 12 donuts. Why can't I put these 24 donuts in the box then? That makes absolutely no sense to me. That's basically what the guy said. You get it, right? So, trucking industry is just really crazy, man. And this is the kind of stupid stuff we put up with all the time. This is why nobody wants to drive a truck. There are too many people in the industry that don't know how to do the... It's like going to McDonald's and finding out that your manager is a construction manager. What the hell does the construction manager know about running a McDonald's? We're dealing with that same situation in the trucking industry all the time. They just don't understand like I said, for us as truck drivers, it becomes second nature. But we still have to plan things. But like I said, because of the situation I was in, I just didn't have time to really start planning this out. So I wasn't sure the exact amount of time. In my head, I was thinking it was going to take me, it was a 4.5 hour drive. So I was actually thinking a 4 hour drive. So it would be 4.5 hours because I was adding my 30 minutes, 15 minutes through Dallas and 15 minutes through Arkansas because I was going halfway through each of them. So I just put that in there. And so I was thinking in my head that it was a 4.5 hour drive. But when I actually started planning, I found out that it's 300 miles. That makes it a 5 hour drive. And then you add the half an hour to it. So that actually turns it into a 5.5 hour drive. Or I'm sorry, 5 hour drive and turns into a 5.5 hour drive. Then you got to do the 10 hour break. Plus I got held up an extra hour at the shipper. I should have been out of there in 2 hours because that's what we planned for. That's the rule of thumb. You plan to be at the shipper and receiver 2 hours each. That's proper planning. You don't plan to be at a shipper 3 hours. You don't plan to be at a shipper 4 hours. You don't plan to be at a shipper 5 hours. Even though it happens all the time, unless you're experienced with the shipper, you don't plan for that. You plan to be at the shipper for 2 hours because that's proper trip planning. When the shipper screws everything up, then you got to recalculate the plan, but that's no longer your fault because you planned properly, because you used the proper planning method, which is 2 hours. That's what we're told. We give them 2 hours. So that's what you plan for, 2 hours. You don't say, I'm going to give you 2 donuts. I don't tell you I'm going to give you 2 donuts, and then you plan on me giving you 4 donuts, right? So, and that's the problem. That's really the problem in this industry. This industry is so dysfunctional. And it's crazy because it's coming from somebody who is dysfunctional. I mean, I'm not even what I would consider a great planner. I'm not a very organized person. When it comes to traveling, I'm really good at planning, ironically. It's one of my good points. It is one of my strong points. I know how to read a map. I've spent my life around cars and trucks and automobiles. So, driving has always been a passion for me. So, I guess that's why, when it comes to planning for this kind of an industry, I'm really good at it. It's just, I understand the reality of the world. I started driving my very first time I ever drove a car. I mean, granted, it was only around the yard, but very first time I ever drove a car was a 67 Buick Skylark convertible. It was, I was 8 or 9. So, that was the very first car I ever actually drove. So, but I've been around cars my whole life, literally. My mother helped my father put a 351 Windsor into a 69 Mustang while she was 8 or 9 months pregnant for me. She pretty much due. I was due any day, and she helping my dad put a big block engine in a Mustang. So when I say I've been around cars my whole life, I'm really not kidding. So that's probably why I'm just really good at planning, because I really understand the road ahead of me. It's just second nature for people that are around cars all the time, planning for traffic and things. It's common knowledge, and you can apply it anywhere you go. Even some places you have to actually go there and experience it, but as soon as you experience it, like California, once you experience it, then you can plan for it really easy. But if you plan for that without ever experiencing California, you're going to get screwed up your first time. I mean, realistically, you're probably going to get screwed up your first time. If you got lucky and everything went right because you just happened to go at just the exact perfect timing where everything just fell perfectly in place and you just got really lucky, Then you're going to be really confident, and the second time you go in there, you're going to get really screwed up because you're going to be like, oh yeah, I remember this and I remember that. So you're going to be planning, and you're going to try to be fine-tuning your plan, and oh yeah, then it becomes a real nightmare. But once you experience it, and you realize, oh, this is what California is, you can plan for it really easy, but you have to pull. And even then, you still. California is just really. Once you experience it, you understand it. But if you just never experienced California, California is actually hard to plan for. I shouldn't say that it's really easy. I mean, you can go into LA one day, and you give yourself 2 extra hours, and you're going to get there an hour early. And then you can go into LA another day, give yourself 4 extra hours, and be an hour late. So, and that can change day to day. So, yeah, California, yeah, okay. California is kind of an exception to the rule, actually. I mean, even Atlanta, Atlanta, you have to learn about McDonough, because the thing is, you can go right through Atlanta with no problems at all, and you're still going to spend 30 minutes in traffic at McDonough. Or you can be coming through McDonough, have actually no issues at all, and then wind up being held up an hour in Atlanta. It's just the way Atlanta is. It's things like that, experienced drivers, we understand this. We know these things. That's what I'm saying. It's actually giving me an idea of what I'm probably going to do when I decide I'm not driving when I decide this is it, I'm done, I'm not driving the truck anymore, and I start planning ahead for what I'm going to do for a job as I build up my art business and my apparel business and start really tackling writing. I know what I'm going to do now. And it's not going to be I'm not going to be a broker. I just don't want the headache. I'm not going to do that. But, yeah. It's just it's a really chaotic business. And if you want to be a broker, you really need to learn the hours of service, first of all. And then you can't use Google Maps to plan your routing. You really can't. First of all, Google Maps is going to take the truck in places where it can't go. So that's the first issue. And sometimes that's a major issue because you're using Google Maps, and it could be as short as a trip like this, 300 miles. And because you're using Google Maps, you're planning for a 300-mile trip, and in reality, for the truck, it could be 375 miles. It could be 400 miles. So you're looking at an hour and a half to 2 hour difference from what you're planning for and what reality is. So you cannot use Google Maps to plan truck time. You can't plan any kind of timing for a truck using Google Maps. And the longer the mileage is, the worse it gets. If you go from coast to coast, you could wind up being off by pretty much a whole shift. You really can. And then when you put hazmat in that, you could wind up being off by more than a day because you're using Google Maps, not understanding the industry. You really need to know this industry to be a broker. And there's too many people that they're getting their brokerage licenses and they have absolutely no comprehension at all of the industry. Never mind those that they think they know the industry because, their dad drove a truck part-time, or maybe their dad drove a truck full-time, and every now and then they talked with their dad, but never even spent the day in the truck. But because their dad was a truck driver, or maybe, you got somebody, oh yeah, my uncle's cousin's brother was a truck driver, so I know all about the industry. It does not qualify you to be a broker. You need to really know the hours of service inside and out, like a truck driver, and you need to understand the infrastructure of this country like a truck driver. And even a rookie truck driver, I mean, by the time you lose your rookie wings, you're pretty much hardened to it, and you can actually start to plan properly for the infrastructure. But I mean, even then, you're looking, it takes you 4 or 5 years to really be able to fine tune your planning anywhere in the country. And even then, you can still wind up going into places that, it still throws you off, because you might go into some place where, you're driving 4 or 5 hours up into the mountains and using all back roads to get up into there, and you're not used to planning for that. So, you're someone that you come to rely on because let's say you're working for a mega carrier, and so everything is almost interstate driving. It's very rarely that you're ever off the interstate. So you've been using that formula that I mentioned earlier, where you're using the 50 miles an hour average. And the thing is that you've learned to add in your 30-minute break, and you learn to add in for your cities. So you've learned to do these little things so that you can tune. But then you wind up in a situation where you're driving 300 or 400 miles on all side roads and back roads, and so your average speed all back through there is actually 40 miles an hour. Now you're going slower, which means you're losing 10 minutes every hour. And if you did that for 6 or 7 hours of driving, you've lost over an hour. That can really screw you up, because it can really throw off your whole planning on the trip when it comes to doing your break. And because you're planning on doing your break 15 or 20 minutes from the shipper or receiver, I should say, you know where you're going to do your break, but because you miscalculated by using that old formula, because you don't understand these roads, these back mountain roads, like going on some of the back mountain roads in Colorado, you could wind up driving where you're driving for 4 or 5, even 6 hours, and your average speed, because of these roads that you're on, your average speed is only 30 miles an hour. You're way off. You're off by hours on your planning. But the brokers don't know this. If they're not an experienced truck driver, I can't expect them to know it. But that's the problem. These people should be experienced truck drivers that are doing this. Or they should have experienced truck drivers in their company that are running in the planning department. I mean, if you really want to run a brokerage properly, you have a route planning department where everybody in that department are truck drivers. And they're the ones saying, and they understand that you can't use the split sleeper berth rules. If they're good at the job, they understand that that is a tool for the driver, not for them to use for planning, because they understand why that tool is there. So they would be actually the ones planning this all out. And they're saying, listen, if the driver gets there at this time at the shipper, and they need to be here at the receiver, and we got these multiple stops, this is what needs to happen. This is where a sleeper berth, there's going to be a sleeper berth break in here somewhere. They need to do a 10-hour break in here. So yeah, you're looking at a 13.5-hour trip, but 13.5 hours to do a 6.5-hour trip. But the reality is they need 16.5 hours to do this 6.5-hour trip. And that's as long as nothing goes wrong at the shipper. So this is the way this is all got to be planned out. And this is the minimum time that you can schedule these appointments for. And the truck driver can lay that all out for them. And then they can work with that, and they can make their plans. And you know what? They're rarely going to have a late load. Is it going to still happen from time to time? Yeah, it's still going to happen from time to time, because there are things that, no matter how tightly and how good of a planner you are, things are still going to happen. When I plan everything out, and even my dispatcher can, everybody at the company where I work for, they can verify this. 95, 96, 97% of the time, when I say this is what time I can be there, I'm there at that time. And one of my tricks is I always give myself 1 hour. I always add 1 hour after I'm all done. I put myself 1 hour ahead for the so if I'm going to be there at 11, I tell them I'm going to be there at 12. This way, if something stupid that I just can't foresee pops up, if it's a short trip, I'll add 30 minutes. But, I always add that just stupid things pop up that you can't plan for. So, and I'm almost never late. When I say this is what time I'm going to be there, almost 100% of the time, that's what time I'm there. Or I'm an hour early. I'm almost always early. 97, like I said, out of that 97% of the time, almost probably 98, 99% of that time, I'm early. It's very rare that I would be there only 15 minutes early. I'm usually 30 minutes early, 45 minutes early, an hour early like I planned for, almost all the time. But like I said, I understand the world that I'm navigating out here. A broker who lives in Seattle and has never even seen Portland cannot plan for traffic in Atlanta. They can't do it. If they've never even seen anything outside of Seattle, they cannot plan for anything outside of Seattle. If they live in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, and they've never been out of the county, they can't even plan for what's going to happen in Monticello, New York. Because they're two different towns. Or Middletown, New York. Middletown's a big town. They can't plan for that. If they've never even seen what's a big town in Pennsylvania? But not a city, but a big town. If they've never even seen Scranton, Pennsylvania, they can't plan for Middletown, New York. So that's the problem. You need to be experienced with the country as a whole to plan. If you're not the person that should be planning. You can do the booking, but you need somebody on your team that is doing the planning for you, saying, this is when they could be at this stop, this is when they could be at this stop, this is when they could be at this stop, this is when... And it needs to be a truck driver, because a truck driver understands. Can there be problems with that still? Yes, sometimes there can be problems. You might wind up where you're going to have a renegade truck driver on there where, they're one of the ones that, they're like, whoo, we got 48 hours to get there to do a 50-hour trip. Hey, Jack, I need an 8-ball. But, aside from drivers like that, most drivers will plan it out properly. And you will almost never have a late load that you booked. Like I said, there are still things that can happen. I mean, you could be out in the middle of nowhere where there's let's say you're going across US 50. US 50, the loneliest highway in the country. You could wind up where there was a major accident out there and you're held up for 2, 3, 4 hours. I mean, it's rare, but it can happen. So that's what I mean. Things will still happen. You're never going to be 100%. It's impossible to be 100% because you cannot plan for every extraordinary event. You're driving through Atlanta at 3 o'clock in the morning. There should be absolutely no traffic at all. And a meteorite falls out of the sky and crashes in the middle of the interstate. You're going to have problems. You're going to be held up. The load is going to be late. Unless you're just starting out and everything is perfectly but if it falls on the bridge in front of you that you got to go across and there's no way to get turned around and you're held up and you need to wait for police to get there and then everything needs to be coordinated so everybody can get turned around and get off at a ramp behind you, that takes time. By the time it's all said and done, you're probably going to lose 2, 3, maybe 4 hours. All because of meteorite. Who can plan for a meteorite falling out of the sky? But it can happen. The point is there are things that you cannot plan for that will happen. So you cannot be 100%. Nobody can be 100%. It's impossible. That's why we're not God. I know some of you think you're God. I get it. But you're really not God. You're just delusional. So, to the broker who asked me, how can he plan anything differently? That is how you plan differently. You put somebody, if you don't have a planning department, you build a planning department and you have it staffed by experienced truck drivers who understand the hours of service, they understand the reality of the infrastructure in this country, and they can plan it out for you so that you know the minimum time to schedule loads. And if your planning department tells you that you can't schedule the first stop for anything before, say, 8 a.m., and you decide to schedule for 6 a.m. and it gets there late, that's your fault, not your planning department's fault. If you're going to get a planning department, you have to listen to the planning department. But that is how you fix the problem. You start putting more truck drivers into the jobs that need to be done for logistics to work properly. And planning is definitely one of those jobs that require a truck driver, an experienced truck driver.